That afternoon, the sun cast a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. Amira and Tia told their parents they were just going out to get some ice cream, but by nightfall, the entire city began to realize no one would ever see the girls again. There were no screams, no signs of struggle, no strange car speeding away. It was as if the whole thing was a dream the Evans family couldn't wake up from. What made it all the more chilling was the fact that the ice cream shop was only 4 blocks from their home, a route the girls had walked dozens of times, in broad daylight, down a tree-lined street where dogs napped lazily on front porches. So, how? On June 2nd in 1988, could 2 children simply vanish as if they had never existed? This wasn't just another missing persons case. It was a tear in reality itself, where memory, time, and faith all seemed to bend. And it would take more than 3 decades before anyone found the first trace of Amira, an old, weathered notebook filled with hand-drawn star maps, buried deep in the woods that had been abandoned since 1990. This story has no clear ending, but one thing is certain after that day: Springfield was never the same again. In 1988, the town of Springfield looked like a living postcard from small-town America. In the 80s, white-painted wooden houses, perfectly trimmed lawns, and the soft clatter of bicycle wheels echoing across sunlit pavement in a quiet corner of the town's south side. The Evans family lived in a modest 2-story home with a pale gray porch and maple trees casting cool shadows across the front yard. Nobody here was wealthy, but people lived with the kind of familiar kindness that made Springfield the kind of place where adults felt safe letting their kids play outside until nightfall. Every morning, Karen Evans drove off in her old hatchback just before 6 a.m., heading to the city hospital where she worked as the lead nurse on the morning ER shift. Karen was quick, reserved, and sharp-eyed, someone who had seen both life and death up close after the divorce. She raised her 3 children alone, juggling long shifts and quiet evenings preparing dinner for the family. Her oldest, Amira, took after her the most and worried her the most. Amira wasn't loud like the other kids in her class. She always carried a hard-bound notebook filled with scribbles only she seemed to understand: Jupiter's path, the shapes of nebulae, hand-drawn coordinates that followed no clear logic. 13 years old, with long curly hair that shimmered like copper thread in the sunlight, Amira spent hours reading about the cosmos or sketching circles, spirals, diagonal lines. Karen once asked her what she was drawing, and Amira simply smiled and said, "I'm trying to draw the feeling when time shifts a little." Nobody understood, not even her mother. Tia, the younger sister, was a world apart, 11, quick-witted, full of loud laughter, and always telling ghost stories to the neighborhood kids during backyard get-togethers. To the neighbors, she was the little spark of the block, sprinting with a bucket of water after the boys 1 minute, hiding in trees and etching animals into oak bark the next. Her drawings were vivid and layered. One showed a cracked moon falling onto a rooftop, another, a giant curled up in a burning city. When asked, she'd reply matter-of-factly, "I dreamed it. Last night. Every night's different," unlike Amira, who preferred the quiet of her room. Tia flung windows open, perched on her desk, and whistled strange notes to call sparrows. The 2 girls couldn't be more different, but between them was an invisible bondone strong enough to make the adults believe they'd never be apart. On June 2nd that year, Springfield felt unusually warm for early summer. The pavement shimmered, and the first insects of the season buzzed lazily along the wooden fences. It was the first day of summer break, no school, no camps, no rush. Karen left the house at 5:50 a.m., as usual. Their father, Miles, was just the weekend visitor by then, so it was just the 3 siblings at home. Amira fixed breakfast cereal and bananas while Tia tuned in to morning cartoons with their repetitive sing-song music. At 2:10 p.m., the girls walked out toward the ice cream shop on Fremont Avenue, just 4 blocks away. They carried nothing but a few coins their mom left and Tia's sketchbook tucked into her back pocket. Strangely, for the first time in memory. Amira left her star map journal at home. The Evans neighborhood wasn't the kind of place where strange things happened. People were used to Mr. Wilson's morning paper route, to Mrs. Richland's honking as she reversed out of her driveway, and to the soft knocks of neighborhood kids asking each other out to play, right as the clock struck 3. In that world, Amira and Tia weren't outsiders. They had friends, went to Tuesday art classes at the town library, and loved flipping through vintage astronomy calendars in the dusty bookstore behind the church. Amira's principal once told Karen that the girl had an unexplainable kind of intuition shed once turned in an essay about the sensation of falling out of reality in a dream, which concerned the faculty so much they held a meeting, worried she might be depressed. But Amira was healthy. She ate well, laughed when the neighbor's dog wore its winter sweater. Still, sometimes she'd stare at a spot in the sky and tell her sister, "I think time is cracking open right there, Tia." Meanwhile, the school's brightest in art class often left her teachers at a loss with drawings too surreal to make sense. One day, she sketched an upside-down clock bleeding next to a headless shadow, grinning wide. When asked why, Tia replied, "Because in my dream, the clock didn't want to tick anymore. It was sad, so it cried blood." Adults were unsettled, but they let it go. Tia was still polite, still had friends, still showed up every day. Both girls, curiously, were never afraid of the dark. They used to play shadow games blindfolded, wandering around the house in pitch black to feel what it's like to lose direction. Once, after playing, Amira told her mom she felt like we're not the only 3 people living here. Karen had laughed then, brushing it off as a joke, but the next day, she changed every lock in the house after school. The girls would often walk home together, stopping at Fremont's ice cream shop where a girl named Ninahu always made Tia a special strawberry swirl worked behind the counter. But that day, Nina wasn't there. A newly hired college student was working a quiet guy who kept his head down. All he remembered was 2 little girls came in around 2-something, but nothing else. In fact, no one could pinpoint the exact moment they disappeared. Police would later call it a white gap a window of time where everyone remembered bits and pieces, but no one could piece them together. That afternoon, the sky stayed blue. The breeze still rustled the trees. Mr. Wilson still delivered papers. The wind chime on the Evans porch still sang its soft notes. No one saw anyone running. No one heard a scream. No sign of anything wrong. But at 4:30 p.m., when Karen returned home and flipped on the kitchen light to make her daughter's favorite pasta, she felt something off. The silence in the house wasn't normal. No Tia singing in the bathroom. No soft music from Amira's room. And then she noticed Tia's purple backpack still on the couch. Her play shoes gone. Karen circled the house twice before calling the neighbors. In a town where everyone knows everyone by name, a missing child wasn't just rare, it was unheard of. Mrs. Renita, from next door, rushed over the moment she heard. I saw them leave around 2. I waved at Tia. She had a cap on and was drawing something on her palm with a marker. That detail Karen would never forget. The drawing, the wave, and her own early assumption that this afternoon would pass like any other in a town like Springfield. Missing was not a word people used. Kids walked to school alone. Windows stayed open in summer. Spare keys sat under flower pots. But that evening, as darkness crept down from the western hills and the first fireflies floated above the grass, something had shifted. The air grew heavy. Sounds seemed to muffle. The entire town held its breath, waiting for something none of them could name, to many. Amira and Tia were symbols of innocence, of summers that felt endless. Once, when a sudden rainstorm hit, they'd run barefoot down Main Street, splashing in puddles, laughing so loud it made everyone in the coffee shop smile. No one could have imagined that just weeks later, their names would hang from every street lamp, show up in every window, and echo as the unanswerable question on everyone's lips. That night, as yellow light spilled across the quiet trees. Karen sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee long gone cold. She didn't cry. She just stared at the road where she'd watched her daughters disappear at 2:10 p.m. She didn't know what had happened, who had reached them, or where they had gone. But she knew one thing for sure, the feeling, that hollow pressure in her chest, like someone had reached in and taken a piece of her heart without a sound. Then, at exactly 1:47, A, the wind chime stirred, but there was no wind, no one at the door, just a single folded piece of paper lying on the porch floor. Inside, drawn in heavy red ink, was a single circle. Karen didn't panic, not right away. She checked the bedrooms, the bathroom, the basement, still no sign of either girl. But inside her, a cold emptiness began to creep upward from her gut. This wasn't the worry of kids sneaking off to play. This was something more primal, the instinct of a mother who knows something is deeply, terribly wrong. By 4:45, she had called the neighbors, first the ones next door, then 3 more houses down. No one had seen the girls since early afternoon. Karen hurried down the block, turned onto Fremont, and quickened her pace toward the ice cream shop. The sun still shone, but the light now felt hollow, like it had lost its warmth, its life. Fremont's ice cream stayed open until evening, though the place was nearly empty by then. The young man behind the counter had just started his shift. He wiped down the counter with a distant look in his eyes. Karen walked straight in and asked, "2 little girls came here this afternoon. One with curly hair, the other with straight. One wore a red shirt and a denim skirt. Did you see them?" The boy nodded slowly. "Yeah." Around 2:10 they sat outside, got strawberry cones, and talked to someone. Karen's heart thudded. Who she pressed. A young woman. He said she came from the direction of the park, wearing a white blouse, long black hair. I figured she knew them. They laughed a lot. Karen held her breath. Someone they knew. But the girls had no cousin, no young woman living nearby. She drove straight to the police station. At first, the desk officer kept a calm tone. "Mrs. Evans. Kids sometimes wander farther than planned. Maybe they stopped by a friend's house, but as Karen laid out the facts, the time they left, the short route, the witness, and most of all, her final sentence. They've never been late past 5. Never. Not once." The mood changed. The officer reached for the phone, contacted the patrol unit, and led Karen into a private room for a full statement. At that moment, the case officially opened. The 2 girls were entered into the missing person system. Amira Evans, 13, forearm 11, curly brown hair, wears glasses. Tia Evans, 11, long black hair, petite, with a small scar on her left wrist. Search orders went out over the local radio. By 7 p.m., the route from the Evans home to Central Park was cordoned off. A canine unit was called in. The dogs sniffed the scent from Amira's shirt sleeve and led the team past the ice cream shop, behind a row of houses, and toward the wooded edge of town, a place that used to be a summer camp. Now long abandoned, but just 300 meters in. Everything stopped. The trail went cold, no more scent, no clear direction, as if the air itself had swallowed every trace of what had been. Night fell over the forest like a heavy blanket. Insects buzzed in the stillness. Flashlights scanned trees, brush, broken roots. One officer spotted a pale yellow ribbon tangled on a low branch, about a meter above ground. Karen confirmed it was Tia's hair tie, but oddly, it was spotless. No dirt, no tears, no signs of a struggle, as if someone had gently removed it and placed it there on purpose. At 9:15 p.m., as the search team fanned out deeper into the woods, one of the K9 dogs barked twice, then stopped. It turned to its handler, backed away slightly, and sat down. The scent came from the hollow of a large tree inside, a sharp metallic smell. When the flashlight hit it, they found a small, rusted pendant lying among the dry leaves. It was a circle, etched with 3 interlocking rings, the exact design Amira often drew back at the station. The records room buzzed with activity. A young officer, reviewing old files, found a missing persons case from 1974, same forest, same area. The victim, a 10-year-old boy who vanished on a camping trip, never found. The file contained one seemingly unimportant detail. His backpack was found hanging from a high branch, and inside was a notebook. On the first page, 3 circles, identical to Amira's drawing. It was no longer coincidence. A parallel investigation reopened. Analysts began asking bigger questions. Was this disappearance isolated, or part of something that had been happening far longer than anyone realized, news of the case spread fast. By morning, local newspapers had Amira and Tia's photos on the front page. The town's morning radio gave 3 full minutes to repeat their descriptions and the last known details. Across Springfield, residents put up flyers, formed volunteer groups, and searched every corner they could, but all paths led back to one place, the woods behind Fremont's. And there, time stood still. No new clues, no new sounds. No one answered, and no one came back. On the 3rd day, the skies broke open. A heavy summer rain swept across the town, like a release of everything people had held in. Karen stood at the window, a cold cup of tea in hand, watching each drop trace its way down the glass. Inside her, a hollowness she couldn't name. Outside, volunteers pressed on, dark raincoats moving between the trees, calling out the girls' names beneath distant thunder. That night, something strange happened. Around 11 p.m., Jerry, a resident who lived more than a mile from the woods, called in a report while letting his dog out. He heard the sound of children laughing from the direction of the forest. At first, he thought it was a radio, but the sound lasted almost a full minute, clear, echoing, then suddenly cut off. What disturbed him most was that it didn't sound like playful laughter, but like someone very far away, trapped, trying to send a signal. Police logged the report and returned to the area. This time, they found something else, a single purple rubber sandal, half buried under a rain-washed root. Karen identified it instantly. It was Tia's, but the strap was clean as if freshly removed. It didn't look like it had been lying there for 3 days. Meanwhile, an old security camera from a camera repair shop nearly 2 miles away captured something chilling: the footage. Time-stamped 2:37 p.m. on the day of the disappearance, showed 2 girls walking down the sidewalk across from the ice cream shop. 10 paces behind them, a woman in a white blouse and black baseball cap, walking slowly. The image was blurry, face unclear, but her movements made one thing obvious: she wasn't headed in the same direction by chance. She was following them. A still from the footage was circulated among police networks. A few residents said they'd seen the woman in recent weeks, but no one knew her name. Now, she became the first real suspected unidentified woman, shadowing 2 children. What began as a single missing persons report was slowly revealing the shape of something bigger, something deliberate, something repeated, and maybe something that had been happening for far longer than anyone dared to believe. On the 5th morning after the disappearance, a 26-year-old volunteer named Malik spotted a small piece of fabric caught on a branch near the northern edge of the forest, just above the bank of a shallow ditch. The fabric was silvery gray, similar to the jacket Karen remembered Amira wearing that day. Police collected the cloth and sent it for testing, but the real shock wasn't the fabricate was where it had been found, nearly a mile from where the K9 team lost the scent. And in the completely opposite direction from the original search route. That detail forced investigators to reconsider everything. If someone had moved the girls or led them another way, they must have known the terrain well, and they must have been calm, controlled. Then came a new witness, Mrs. Mendez, 63, who lived near the old gas station 2 blocks from the woods, called the police. She said that on the afternoon the girls vanished, around 3 p.m., she saw a dark blue van parked near the fence line by the forest. A young woman sat behind the wheel, staring at the dashboard clock. Someone seemed to move in the back of the van. Mrs. Mendez didn't think much of it at the time, but when she saw the police sketch of the mystery woman on TV, she was certain. That's her. Pointed face, lips pressed tight, didn't move for 10 minutes. The statement shifted the investigation again for the first time. Detectives seriously considered the possibility of multiple perpetrators and a coordinated plan. The evidence began to interlink the blurry photo from the security camera, Mrs. Mendez's testimony, the pendant in the woods, the old 1974 file. A map analyst named Derek was brought in to look for patterns. What he found stunned the team: all 3 known locations, the 1974 case, Amira and Tia's disappearance. and an unconfirmed 1980 reportal sat along a curving axis connecting three forested areas that once belonged to a defunct lumber company called Hollow Pines. The company had shut down in 1982 after lawsuits over illegal logging and groundwater contamination, but buried in its bankruptcy paperwork was a note temporary research structures decommissioned and buried on site. No explanation, no details. Things got even stranger later that day. While processing the bag containing the gray cloth, an evidence technician found something unexpected tucked beneath the seal of faded, blurry Polaroid. In the photo, two young girls sitting on wooden steps, wearing white t-shirts, their faces turned away. Behind them, drawn onto the wooden wall, a symbol, three interlocking rings matching the pendant, and the sketchbook from the 1974 boys case. The photo was sent to the state's image analysis unit, using enhancement tools. The team sharpened the background, and what they saw left them speechless. Part of the wooden wall showed scorch marks, like it had once caught fire but hadn't fully burned. In the lower right corner of the frame, barely visible, was a strange circular object, resembling a clock, but with no numbers, just three dots and a long, connecting line. When Karen saw that image, she fainted. The reason, a year earlier. While cleaning Amira's room, she'd thrown out a small wooden box engraved with that exact symbol. She'd thought it was a toy. Now it was a piece of the puzzle. At the same time, another lead surfaced. A classmate of Amira's named Jaden was re-interviewed after his mother told detectives. He knows something, but he's scared to say it, during a 2-hour session. Jaden revealed that 2 weeks before the disappearance, Amira had confided in him she believed someone was following her. One afternoon, walking home, she turned and saw a woman in a black baseball cap, standing motionless beneath a tree. She didn't move, didn't blink. Amira never told her mom, thinking maybe it was her imagination. But Jaden swore that the way she said it, it was like something was really wrong. Meanwhile, a group of 3 retired military veterans launched an independent search. They chose to inspect the old warehouse ruins once owned by Hollow Pines, using a metal detector. They discovered an iron hatch buried beneath a thick layer of dead leaves. They pried it open and found a decaying wooden staircase descending into darkness. The air reeked of mold, damp earth, and rust. Below was a small, empty room, except for deep, parallel scratches along the wall, as if someone had once tried to claw a message into the wood. And in the center of the floor lay a child's sketchbook, torn at one corner, its blue cover barely intact. On the front, scribbled in shaky handwriting, "We can't see the sun." That discovery forced investigators to revisit old files tied to Hollow Pines, deep in Greene County archives. They found a forgotten report describing unusual incidents at research site number 3. The report mentioned repeated power failures, the sound of children at night, and signs that indicated human presence with no individuals found. The file had been marked, "No further investigation warranted." The last signature, D.A. Lachea, former site supervisor, who now lived alone in the company's defunct employee camp. When police approached Lachey, he was a 78-year-old man, blind in one eye. At first, he dismissed everything, called the records nonsense, but when they showed him the interlocking ring symbol in the sketchbook, he fell silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "There are things in those woods, things that shouldn't be disturbed. We tried to warn them. Nobody listened." When asked who we meant, he replied, "The ones who signed the silence agreements, the ones still alive, one of us would go back." At that exact moment, police received an anonymous call, a woman's voice, quiet but clear. "I know the girls aren't in town anymore. They were taken farther. The woman you're looking for, she's not working alone, and this isn't the first time," before they could ask more. The line went dead. The number was masked, untraceable. One last inconsistency came into focus. Between the time the girls left the ice cream shop and when the final security camera caught them on video, there was a 20-minute gap. The walk should have taken 5 minutes at most. So where did they stop with whom investigators went frame by frame, analyzing shadows, reflections, even storefront windows until they found it? In frame 379, reflected in the laundromat glass, was a dark blue van turning left. It didn't appear on any forward-facing cameras. It was gone in a second. But that second changed everything. That was the moment that confirmed someone had been following. There had been planning. The pendant, the ribbon, the sketchbook. None of them were lost by accident. They were left behind. Markers, or distractions. The question was no longer, what happened to Amira and Tia? It had become something much deeper, much darker. Who's controlling this story? And why are children the ones being taken? The new week after the girl's disappearance began with a chilling phone call. A woman with a northern accent, identifying herself only as Annabelle, told police, "I know that van. I was in it once." The call was recorded and traced to a payphone in Kansas City, nearly a 4-hour drive from Springfield. Officers were dispatched immediately, but the area was empty. No one waited. What Annabelle revealed, however, opened an entirely new line of inquiry, according to her. The woman in the sketch, the suspect with the black baseball cap, wasn't a stranger. She was a former employee of Hollow Pines named Eliza Hargrove. Eliza had once overseen the company's biomedical research office. She was described as quiet, withdrawn, and often worked late. Records suggested she began exhibiting signs of mental distress after the company's closure. She vanished from all systems in 1986, 2 years before Amira and Tia disappeared. No known address, no bank account, no medical files, as if she had been erased. A former co-worker, Mr. Rowland, confirmed that Eliza had lived in cabin 7A, small wooden house on the far western edge of the forest. When investigators arrived, the cabin was abandoned, the door chained shut with rusted links. Inside, everything was covered in dust. On a rotting table, they found a tin box containing dozens of old Polaroid saw showing children in the woods, most turned away or cropped to hide their faces. One photo was dated 6/2/1988, the day the girls vanished. At the bottom of the box was an unsent letter. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. "I can't stand the crying anymore. They don't sleep. They keep calling my name. I was wrong, but they won't let me leave." Eliza Hargrove was now considered the first official suspect. But new questions emerged. If Eliza had done something, where was she now, and who were they? Mentioned in her haunting letter, search teams swept the area around the cabin and found a narrow passage hidden behind an old bookshelf. It led to a basement nearly buried beneath vines and debris. Inside the tight space were abandoned items, an oil lamp with soot stains, a pair of small children's shoes with hand-tied laces, and a torn, decaying journal. Investigators had to use gloves and high-powered flashlights to read the pages. The first entry read, "Day 93. They're starting to understand I'm the only one who still hears them." The rest of the journal was fragmented, describing unnamed children with strange speech patterns, and a group that appeared only when dusk fell. The author claimed they had no clear leader, but always returned when it got dark. Just as the public began to fixate on Eliza, a stunning discovery surfaced. Buried in the police department's slow-to-digitize archives was an old tape from 1986, the year Eliza vanished. It was a call to the confession hotline, one that had been dropped and never followed up. On the tape, Eliza's voice trembled. "I don't think this is real, but when the door closes, I hear laughter. They're not children anymore. I saw their eyes, no whites. I don't want to be here." The call ended with a sharp, violent sound, like someone had struck the phone. This led investigators to a grim possibility. Eliza might not have been just a suspect, she might have also been a victim. A retired forensic psychologist who worked with police in the 1980s was brought in to review the journal and audio. His conclusion sent chills through the team. This is the mind of someone trapped in extended hallucinations due to psychological stress and isolation. But there's something eerie. The descriptions repeat with too much precision, as if it's a script written to be read over and over until someone believes it. So who wrote the script? And was Eliza just another link in a long, hidden chain? Days later, a new twist forced investigators back to the beginning. An independent journalist, known for tracking unresolved child disappearances, submitted a thick dossier to the department. It contained dozens of missing persons cases from the 1970s to early 1990s, all bearing disturbing similarities. They occurred in summer, near forests once owned by Hollow Pines, and witnesses often described a woman ageless, wearing a hat, carrying a tin box. One case. From Oregon in 1979 involved a victim also named Tia. When handwriting experts compared Eliza's letter to a note from that 1979 file, they found an 87% match, which left only two explanations. Either Eliza had lived under false identities for decades, or someone had been reenacting her actions like a ritual. The second theory was far more terrifying. This wasn't an isolated kidnapping. This was part of a long-term, orchestrated pattern spanning generations, facing public pressure and growing uncertainty. Authorities released a partial statement. For the first time, they used the phrase an unidentified group, potentially linked to multiple juvenile disappearances. The internet exploded. Some believed it was a trafficking network, others suspected a secret cult. But a smaller group, including former detectives and families of earlier victims, went further. They proposed the theory of psychological pattern scripting, the idea that memory itself was being manipulated. And Eliza, they argued, was a failed experiment. As June drew to a close, marking 35 years since Amira and Tia vanished, something strange happened. Karen received a plain envelope at her door. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single item, a red thread bracelet, handmade, with one bead etched with the letter M. Tia had made that bracelet for her years ago. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no message. But for Karen, it was clear. Someone was still out there, still watching, still waiting to tell the rest of the story. 2 days after the red thread bracelet arrived at the Evans home, a discovery shook the entire case to its core. A forensic coordinator found a coding error in the evidence database, one that changed everything. The hair sample previously confirmed to belong to Tia had already been cataloged in 1983. It had been part of a separate case in Arkansas, involving another missing girl, also named Tia Roberts. When the sample IDs were cross-checked, specialists confirmed the unthinkable: the hair had been mislabeled for years. In truth, there was no DNA evidence at the Springfield scene that could be definitively linked to the Evans sisters. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. News outlets asked the question everyone feared: had the entire investigation been misled by a foundational error, and if the Polaroids, the pendant, and the hair could all be from unrelated cases, then what, if anything, actually belonged to Amira and Tia? Public confidence in the case collapsed. The Evans family began receiving anonymous phone calls, distant voices giggling, whispering the girls' names in bizarre, implausible contexts. Tia's in my backyard, still playing, or Amira just bought comic books at the pharmacy. Police attempted to trace the calls, but they came from different states, with no apparent connection, except one chilling pattern they started just after the bracelet arrived. A new theory began to emerge. This might be memory manipulation at a communal level. Sociologist Denise Wright, an expert on false memory syndromes following collective trauma, suggested it's possible someone has replicated similar clues across different states and decades, creating a network of suggestion that leads witnesses to recall things that never happened or convinces them they did. She pointed out that nearly every Hollow Pines-linked disappearance included eerily similar witness details: a woman, a cabin, a familiar object, even when these accounts came from places hundreds of miles apart. The bigger question slowly came into view. What if someone or a group had orchestrated these disappearances as part of a larger social experiment, and if so, why fear control? Or was it the desperate work of those long forgotten, trying to be seen as the investigation spiraled into uncertainty? The team did something they hadn't before. They went back to Karen Evans and asked the question that, until now, seemed unthinkable. Are you absolutely sure you saw your daughters leave the house that day? Karen froze. After a long silence, she answered quietly, I remember them walking past the door, but now that I think harder, I don't remember the door shutting. No footsteps down the porch. Like always. Just I remember brushing Tia's hair that morning. Then I looked up and they were gone. Her statement, instead of bringing clarity, deepened the fog. Was Karen mistaken, or was she, too, a victim of a carefully planted false memory? Memory researcher Dr. Daniel Lee, after reviewing testimony and patterns, offered a chilling possibility. We may be facing an informational virus, a repeated narrative pattern passed from one person to another, reshaping memory to match a shared blueprint. according to him, symbols like 3 dots and a line, the cabin, the woman in the hat. These might not be real events, but subconscious codes representing collective fears, and they were spreading. Then, another lead surfaced, a man named Xavier Dean, a former maintenance worker for Hollow Pines who had lived off-grid in Colorado for years, walked into a police station and confessed to witnessing behavioral studies on children conducted in isolation. He brought with him a weathered wooden box filled with handwritten notes describing these experiments, which allegedly took place at summer camps funded by the company with involvement from external partners, identities unknown. But Dean swore he'd never heard of Amira or Tia, and his notes only went up to 1985, 3 years before the Evans girls vanished. At this point, the truth was no longer black or white. It had become a tangled mass of overlapping clues, fragmented memories, manipulated evidence, and a growing fear that something far deeper and darker was unfolding beneath the surface. Springfield was no longer calm. Families kept their children indoors. Online forums fractured into 2 camps. One blamed negligence and coincidence. The other saw a deeper design and orchestrated psychological game, pulling in society itself like a shadow they couldn't shake. And while the chaos unfolded. At Cabin 7, on the western edge of the forest, someone turned the lights back on. This time, no one saw who went in. 35 years after the disappearance of Amira and Tia Evans, the quiet shadow of that summer still lingers over the town of Springfield, despite hundreds of articles, dozens of podcasts, and waves of independent filmmakers coming and going. No one has ever been able to give a definitive answer. Karen Evans, now retired, lives alone in the same house. She never changed the girls' room. It remains exactly as it was the day they left, frozen in time. A cassette radio stays on, tuned to static, as if she's waiting for a signal from somewhere, anywhere, to break the silence. One late evening in June, a small package appeared on her doorstep. Inside was a black and white photograph, taken from behind of 2 young girls holding hands, walking into the woods. The image was blurry, with no date. But a message was scrawled on the back. They are still walking. No DNA, no security footage, no sign of who sent it. But Karen didn't cry. She quietly placed the photo on the altar, between 2 half-burnt candles. To her, it was either a goodbye or a reminder the journey never truly ended. The case was officially closed, not because the questions had been answered, but because no question remained that could still be solved by traditional means. Case, your SPR 1988, A.T. Decky, was archived, later studied in investigative courses as a textbook example of collective memory disruption. Online debates haven't stopped. Some swear they saw Tia at a charity camp in Mexico. Others claim they heard Amira's voice reciting poetry on an old cassette. A Reddit group even recreated Cabin 7 in a virtual reality game, where players must figure out who's real and who's just a shadow. And that, more than anything, cemented this story as a piece of modern folklore, a cultural imprint. Not a closed chapter, but a question echoing endlessly. If it were me, would I remember it right? In the final scene of a documentary about the case, the director chose to leave out narration entirely, just a series of still images: the summer forest, a dirt path, and finally the oil lamp in Cabin 7, still burning. The story of Amira and Tia may have closed on paper, but in our shared memory, it lingers like a puzzle piece left hovering, never quite fitting. Perhaps the scariest part isn't that we don't know what happened. It's that we can never be sure what we remember is real, because memory, once touched, never returns whole. There are cases that don't need more evidence, only someone brave enough to remember the right way. And sometimes, what we forget isn't gone at all. It waits quietly in a locked room, or beyond the edge of a forest we once passed without ever turning back. And if someone out there is still listening, still waiting, then the light in that cabin, however small, is still burning, and that alone is why we never stop searching.